The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't need a sign. If you had to ask where it was, you weren't invited. Nestled on the third floor of a building in the old quarter of the city, Ristorante Pavone seated 40 people on a good night and turned away the rest with a politeness that left them certain they had failed some invisible test. Elena Vasquez had been waitressing here for 3 years. She was 29, precise in her movements, economical with her words, and had the particular quality of stillness that came not from timidity but from practice, the learned art of being present without being noticed. She had studied literature at university before the money ran out. She read during her breaks. She tipped the kitchen staff from her own pocket on slow nights. She was carrying 2 plates of braised lamb to table 6 when Fausto Carini arrived. She had never met him. She knew the name. Everyone in the city who worked in establishments like this one knew the name, but names and presence were different things, and presence was what filled the room now. He came in with 4 men, the specific number that communicated not protection but theater. He wore his suit like a statement. He sat at the center table without being shown to it, which was a kind of dominance she had observed before in men who had confused being feared with being respected. Elena arrived at table 6. Set the plates. Turned. She became aware of the problem the way she became aware of most problems. Not in a rush, but as a slow clarification, the way a shape emerges from fog. A dropped comment to one of his men. A gesture at her. The particular angle of a head that meant she was being assessed as scenery rather than as a person. She continued toward the kitchen. His hand caught her arm at the elbow as she passed. "You miss my table," he said. Not a question. She looked down at the hand on her arm. Then she looked up at him. Her expression did not change. He slapped her. Not hard. Not the violence of anger, but the casual assertion of a man who had spent decades demonstrating that the world had no consequence for him. The kind of slap designed not to hurt, but to establish. To put something in its place. The restaurant went silent. Not the silence of shock, though there was that. The silence of a room holding its breath to see what happened next. The kitchen sound stopped. The sommelier, mid-pour, did not finish the pour. 4 of Fausto Carini's own men went very still in the specific way of men who had learned that stillness was the safest response to uncertainty. Elena Vasquez touched the side of her face. Once. With 2 fingers. Then she looked at him with an expression that would take him several weeks to fully understand. She was not frightened. That was the first thing. And the second thing, the thing that made him step back just slightly in a way he would deny for the rest of his life, was that she looked at him the way a person looked at a problem they had already solved. He expected fear. What he got made him step back. He just didn't know why. Not yet. If stories with dangerous women are your obsession, subscribe and hit the bell. A new story drops every week. Now, let's go. The restaurant remained quiet for 11 seconds. Elena counted them. She had a habit of counting things in moments of disruption. Steps between tables, seconds between thunder and lightning, the number of heartbeats it took for a room to return to itself after something unexpected moved through it. 11 seconds. Then Marcelo, the maitre d', appeared from the archway with the particular velocity of a man who had been watching from a safe distance and had now calculated that action was required. Mr. Carini. His voice was warm, careful, the voice of a man walking a narrow ledge. Your usual table has been prepared. Perhaps if you... I'm comfortable here, Fausto Carini said. He was still looking at Elena. She was still looking at him. She had worked in 4 restaurants before this one. A cafe near the university where she'd studied, a trattoria owned by a woman who threw plates when the pasta was overcooked, a hotel restaurant that served businessmen from 8 countries and required its staff to speak 3 languages. She had learned, across all of them, that the moment after a confrontation was the most important moment. Not the confrontation itself, but the beat that followed it, where everything was decided. She made a decision now. She took her notepad from her apron pocket. She uncapped her pen. She looked at Fausto Carini with the professional attention of a woman preparing to take an order. Of course, she said. What can I bring you? The room exhaled. Fausto's eyes narrowed slightly. He had expected. She could see him recalibrating, running through possibilities, tears perhaps, an apology, a trembling exit to the kitchen. He had not expected a notepad. He had not expected the question delivered in the same flat, courteous register as if nothing had occurred. "Whiskey," he said after a beat.
"Neat.
"And whatever Mateo recommends for dinner." He glanced at one of his men, the one closest to him, the one who moved like he made decisions as well as carried them out. "Brunello, if they have it." "We have the 2016, Elena said. "It's excellent." She wrote it down. She went to the kitchen. Her hands were steady. She had noticed this as a data point, had pressed them flat against the steel of the kitchen counter and observed that there was no tremor. Her pulse, when she pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, was 63. Slightly elevated from her resting rate of 58. Not significantly. Julia, the sous chef, looked at her across the pass. Julia was 51 and had worked in professional kitchens for 30 years and was not easily impressed and was, Elena could see, currently impressed. "You all right?" Julia said. "Yes," Elena said. "You know who that is?" "Yes." Julia looked at her for a moment. Then she turned back to her station and began plating with the focused efficiency of a woman who had concluded that whatever was happening, the food still needed to go out. Elena retrieved the whiskey from the bar. She carried it to the table. She set it in front of Fausto Carini with the precision she brought to every table, 2 centimeters from the right edge, as the restaurant required. He watched her do it.
"Sit down," he said.
"I'm working," she said. "I'm not asking." She looked at the chair he indicated. She looked at him. She performed a calculation she did not allow to show on her face. Then she pulled out the chair and sat, and folded her hands on the table, and looked at him with the attentive patience she used for customers who took a long time to decide what they wanted. "What's your name?" he said. "Elena." "Elena." He said it the way men said names they were testing. "You're not afraid of me."
"No," she agreed.
"That's interesting." He turned the whiskey glass. "Most people, in your position, would be afraid of me." "Most people in my position haven't been paying attention," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not anger, something more like surprise, the specific surprise of an animal that is pushed against a fence it expected to be soft and found it solid instead. "What does that mean?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood, straightened her apron, and picked up her notepad. "It means your Brunello will be decanted and at the table in 12 minutes, she said. "The kitchen recommends starting with the burrata." She walked back to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard one of his men exhale. She heard Fausto Carini say nothing. The absence of his voice followed her across the room like a question he hadn't found the words for yet.
"Good," she thought.
She needed him curious. She just sat at his table without permission. Drop a heart in the comments if you already know this woman is not what she appears to be. He came back the following Thursday. Elena had expected this, had factored it into the calculation she had been running since the previous week with the quiet persistence of a background process. She had thought about it over 4 nights. Lying in the narrow apartment, she kept 3 streets from the restaurant, with the window open to the sounds of the city and her notebook open beside her. She had written things in the notebook that she had then torn out and burned in the kitchen sink. Habits she had kept for 6 years. She had also, in those 4 nights, made 3 phone calls. He was shown to the center table again. He came alone this time, no men, which was either carelessness or a statement. She suspected the latter. The absence of witnesses was its own kind of language. She came to the table herself rather than allowing another server to take it. Marcelo's eyes found her across the room. She gave him the small nod that meant she had it handled. "Elena," Fausto Carini said, as if he had practiced the correct register of her name. "Mr. Carini." She uncapped her pen. "The kitchen has a remarkable porchetta tonight. Or, if you prefer, the sea bass arrived this morning from the coast."
"Sit down," he said again.
"I'm working," she said again. "I'll order everything on the menu," he said.
"Sit."
She sat. She was careful about her reasons for sitting, not compliance, not the performance of compliance, but strategy. A man like Fausto Carini, who was told no too quickly, became a man who escalated. A man who was given the illusion of progress became curious. Curious was manageable. Curious wanted to keep talking. She needed him to keep talking. I asked about you, he said. I assumed you would. You have no criminal record. No connections to anyone in any organization. You studied literature. You've worked in restaurants for 7 years.
He paused.
You're no one.
Yes, she said.
So, why aren't you afraid of me? She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Because being afraid of you, she said, is only useful if I'm trying to avoid you. And I'm not trying to avoid you. She met his eyes. I'm serving your table. He looked at her for a long moment. He was 53, she knew. She had looked him up, not with the tools she used to use, but with the ordinary tools available to ordinary people, and even by that limited measure there was enough. Fausto Carini. 2 decades at the center of an organization that moved money, favors, pressure. A man who had broken people and businesses and, on 3 documented occasions, she had found in court records that related to associates rather than to him directly, bones. He also had a daughter at university in Florence who was studying architecture. She had found this in a profile from 4 years ago. She had filed it, the way she filed everything, without deciding what to do with it. You looked me up, he said. Of course, she said. And, you're exactly what I expected, she said. Which is more uncommon than you might think. Something almost crossed his face. Not amusement, something adjacent to it, the flicker of a man encountering a stimulus his existing categories didn't fully account for. Stay, he said. Have dinner with me. I have tables to serve, she said. I'll pay for every empty seat in the restaurant. She looked at him. The offer was not about the money, and they both understood that. It was a test. Would she be bought if the number were large enough? She had passed the previous test. He was running a new one. No, she said. She stood. But I'll bring you the porchetta.
And the sea base.
And the burrata, to start.
She paused.
And the 2013 Barolo, which is better than you think it is. She walked away. She did not look back. She heard him, very quietly, say something to himself in the dialect of his city.
She spoke that dialect.
She had grown up 300 kilometers from his city and had learned it from someone she no longer spoke to, and for reasons she no longer explained. What he said was, "Who is this woman?" She went to the kitchen and leaned against the counter for 4 seconds and allowed herself that. Then she went back to work. The 3 phone calls she had made in the preceding week had been productive. The first was to a woman named Petra, who was 44 and lived in a city she did not name, and who had answered on the second ring, as if she had been waiting. They had spoken in the specific vocabulary they had built over many years, the kind of conversation that sounded, to anyone listening, like 2 old friends catching up, and functioned as something considerably more precise. The second was to a man she called only by a nickname who worked in the kind of government department that did not appear on government websites. He had told her 2 things. The first thing she had already suspected. The second thing had changed the shape of the next several months. The third call she had made to herself, sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a cup of tea going cold beside her, running the scenario from beginning to end, asking the question she always asked, is this worth the cost? And answering it the way she had learned to answer it, not with feeling but with architecture. Does it hold? Does it hold under weight? It held. Fausto Carini came back the following Thursday and the Thursday after that. Each time, he came alone. Each time she sat when he asked, for exactly as long as it served her purposes, and stood when she was ready. Each time she left him with the expression of a man who had been handed a question he couldn't answer, and was beginning to find this more interesting than anything he had been handed in years. She was patient. She had always been patient. She was also, beneath the patience, the most dangerous kind of person, the kind who had done this before, who knew exactly what she was building, and who had already decided, with the cold, clear logic of someone who had learned everything from the last time it went wrong, that she was not going to lose. She made 3 phone calls. She already has a plan. A comment below. Who is she really? Your best theory gets pinned. Her name was Elena Vasquez. That much was true. Everything else required qualifications. She had been born in the South, in a city that smelled of salt and diesel and the particular melancholy of ports, the 3rd child of a woman who worked in import administration, and a father who had died when Elena was 11, with the specific timing of a man who had been making dangerous decisions for years and had finally made one too many. She did not speak about her father. She had filed him years ago in a category she visited occasionally and then closed again. Information that explained a great deal but helped with nothing. She had studied, as Fausto's inquiries had correctly identified, literature. She had been, in her second year, the student most likely to complete a doctorate, according to the professor who had told her this in a corridor outside the library on a Tuesday afternoon that she remembered with the precision she remembered most things. She had thanked him and returned to her book. She had not completed the doctorate. Something had happened in the summer of her third year that had redirected the course of the following 6 years of her life, and she had come out the other side of those 6 years a different architecture from the one that had gone in, same materials, different structure, built to bear different kinds of weight. She waitressed now. This was not all she did, but it was the most visible thing she did, and visibility was a resource she managed carefully. The restaurant had been chosen with care. Not by her employer. She did not have an employer in the conventional sense, but by herself, 18 months ago, when she had identified the Carini organization as the specific problem she had been circling for 3 years and had begun to think about vectors of approach. Fausto Carini was careful. He did not meet people he had not already mapped. He did not trust easily, and when he did, it was slowly, incrementally, through a process of exposure that his consigliera, a lean, watchful man named Ricci, whom she had never met in person but whose profile she had constructed over 14 months from secondary sources, had described, in a document she was not supposed to have read, as the old way. Trust as a structure built over time, tested by use. The direct approach would have taken years and ended in refusal. She had found a faster way. Pavone was the restaurant where 3 of Carini's captains ate regularly. It was the restaurant where he celebrated anniversaries and, twice a year, brought the men who managed his legal operations for dinners that lasted 4 hours and required 3 bottles of wine. It was the restaurant where he was, in the specific way that powerful men were comfortable in specific places, at ease. Ease was a vulnerability. She had learned this from someone who had since stopped being someone she knew, and the lesson had been expensive, and she had kept it. She had taken the waitressing position 16 months ago. She had done the job, had done it well, had learned every table and every regular and every preference and every name that mattered. She had learned, through the patient accumulation of overheard conversations and observed dynamics, more about the Carini organization than most people paid for intelligence had managed to gather. She had not planned for the slap. That had not been in the scenario she had built. She had planned for gradual, managed proximity, for Fausto Carini to notice her, over time, as the server who was different, who looked at him without performance. She had not planned for a provocation. She had not been certain, until the moment it happened, how she would respond. She had responded correctly. She knew this because he was sitting at her tables now. What she had not planned for was the thing she noticed on his 4th visit, a Thursday evening with rain against the windows and the restaurant half full, when he sat across from her and asked her a question that was not on the list of questions she had prepared for. He had said, "What did your father do?" She had been very still for a moment. Then she had said, with the precision that was her default, "He made decisions that had consequences for people who hadn't chosen them." Fausto had looked at his wine glass. "Mine too," he said. It was the first true thing he had told her. She had filed it. She had also, later that night in the apartment with a notebook, sat with it for longer than she had filed things in a long time. She identified Dante Ferraro on her 5th week at Pavone. He was not a regular. He came once for lunch, with 2 men she recognized from a separate thread of her research as operational rather than ceremonial. He was 41, thin-faced, precise in the way of a man who had been trained to be precise, and he sat with his back to the wall and ate his lunch in the focused manner of someone who found meals an inconvenience, but maintained them on principle. She had a name for him in the architecture she had built. The accountant. Not literally. Dante Ferraro was not a financial manager, but a logistics problem, a man who solved the specific difficulties that arose when organizations the size of Carini's needed to move things from places where they were to places where they were needed without the movement being visible. He was also, she had concluded after 14 months of careful research, the specific vulnerability she was here to find. She served his lunch with the same precision she brought to everything. She asked nothing. She noted everything. By the end of the week, she had confirmed 3 things she had suspected and established 1 thing she had not known. The thing she had not known complicated the timeline. She sat with it for 2 days before she decided what it meant. Then she decided it meant she had less time than she had thought, and that Fausto Carini's curiosity was no longer a luxury she was cultivating. It was now the specific tool she needed to use. She went to work. She's been here 16 months. This was never just a waitressing job. Like this video right now, it signals the algorithm and means this story reaches more people. We're just getting started. Her name was Elena Vasquez. That much was true. Everything else required qualifications. She had been born in the South, in a city that smelled of salt and diesel and the particular melancholy of ports, the 3rd child of a woman who worked in import administration, and a father who had died when Elena was 11 with the specific timing of a man who had been making dangerous decisions for years and had finally made one too many. She did not speak about her father. She had filed him, years ago, in a category she visited occasionally and then closed again. Information that explained a great deal but helped with nothing. She had studied, as Fausto's inquiries had correctly identified, literature. She had been, in her 2nd year, the student most likely to complete a doctorate, according to the professor who had told her this in a corridor outside the library on a Tuesday afternoon that she remembered with the precision she remembered most things. She had thanked him and returned to her book. She had not completed the doctorate. Something had happened in the summer of her 3rd year that had redirected the course of the following 6 years of her life, and she had come out the other side of those 6 years a different architecture from the one that had gone in, same materials, different structure, built to bear different kinds of weight. She waitressed now. This was not all she did, but it was the most visible thing she did, and visibility was a resource she managed carefully. The restaurant had been chosen with care. Not by her employer. She did not have an employer in the conventional sense, but by herself, 18 months ago, when she had identified the Carini organization as the specific problem she had been circling for 3 years and had begun to think about vectors of approach. Fausto Carini was careful. He did not meet people he had not already mapped. He did not trust easily, and when he did it was slowly, incrementally, through a process of exposure that his consigliera, a lean, watchful man named Ricci, whom she had never met in person but whose profile she had constructed over 14 months from secondary sources, had described, in a document she was not supposed to have read, as the old way. Trust as a structure built over time, tested by use. The direct approach would have taken years and ended in refusal. She had found a faster way. Pavone was the restaurant where 3 of Carini's captains ate regularly. It was the restaurant where he celebrated anniversaries and, twice a year, brought the men who managed his legal operations for dinners that lasted 4 hours and required 3 bottles of wine. It was the restaurant where he was, in the specific way that powerful men were comfortable in specific places, at ease. Ease was a vulnerability. She had learned this from someone who had since stopped being someone she knew, and the lesson had been expensive, and she had kept it. She had taken the waitressing position 16 months ago. She had done the job, had done it well, had learned every table and every regular and every preference and every name that mattered. She had learned, through the patient accumulation of overheard conversations and observed dynamics, more about the Carini organization than most people paid for intelligence had managed to gather. She had not planned for the slap. That had not been in the scenario she had built. She had planned for gradual, managed proximity, for Fausto Carini to notice her, over time, as the server who was different, who looked at him without performance. She had not planned for a provocation. She had not been certain, until the moment it happened, how she would respond. She had responded correctly. She knew this because he was sitting at her tables now. What she had not planned for was the thing she noticed on his 4th visit, a Thursday evening with rain against the windows and the restaurant half full, when he sat across from her and asked her a question that was not on the list of questions she had prepared for. He had said, "What did your father do?" She had been very still for a moment. Then she had said, with the precision that was her default, "He made decisions that had consequences for people who hadn't chosen them." Fausto had looked at his wine glass. "Mine too," he said. It was the first true thing he had told her. She had filed it. She had also, later that night in the apartment with a notebook, sat with it for longer than she had filed things in a long time. She identified Dante Ferraro on her 5th week at Pavone. He was not a regular. He came once for lunch, with 2 men she recognized from a separate thread of her research as operational rather than ceremonial. He was 41, thin-faced, precise in the way of a man who had been trained to be precise, and he sat with his back to the wall and ate his lunch in the focused manner of someone who found meals an inconvenience, but maintained them on principle. She had a name for him in the architecture she had built: the accountant. Not literally. Dante Ferraro was not a financial manager, but a logistics problem, a man who solved the specific difficulties that arose when organizations the size of Carini's needed to move things from places where they were to places where they were needed without the movement being visible. He was also, she had concluded after 14 months of careful research, the specific vulnerability she was here to find. She served his lunch with the same precision she brought to everything. She asked nothing. She noted everything. By the end of the week, she had confirmed 3 things she had suspected and established 1 thing she had not known. The thing she had not known complicated the timeline. She sat with it for 2 days before she decided what it meant. Then she decided it meant she had less time than she had thought, and that Fausto Carini's curiosity was no longer a luxury she was cultivating. It was now the specific tool she needed to use. She went to work. She's been here 16 months. This was never just a waitressing job. Like this video right now, it signals the algorithm and means this story reaches more people. We're just getting started. She had not planned to find him worth protecting. That was the complication she had not built into the architecture. The intelligence she needed, the structure she was dismantling, the careful work of 6 weeks that she had planned for. The particular quality of a Thursday evening in November, with rain on the windows and candles making the room gold, when Fausto Carini told her something true about his daughter, and she found that she was listening because she wanted to, not because it was useful, that she had not planned for. His daughter's name was Sofia. She was 22 and studying architecture in Florence, and sent her father photographs of buildings he mostly couldn't interpret but kept on his phone anyway. He showed Elena one of these photographs on a Thursday, with the specific self-consciousness of a man doing something slightly embarrassing who had decided to do it anyway. It was a photograph of a bridge under construction. The skeleton of it, before the cladding, all geometry and intention. She says it's beautiful, he said. The structure before you cover it. She says that's the part that matters. Elena looked at the photograph for a long moment.
She's right, she said.
I don't understand architecture, he said. You understand structure, Elena said. You've been building one for 20 years. He looked at her. The expression she saw was not the one he used for the restaurant, for the performance of a man who had learned to make rooms adjust themselves to his presence. It was something underneath that, quieter, slightly uncertain, the face of someone who had just been seen in a way they hadn't expected. She had seen this expression before. She knew what it meant. She knew what the correct strategic response to it was. She picked up her notepad. Another glass of the Barolo? She said. He said yes. She went to the bar. She took longer than necessary, and used the time to remind herself, with the clarity she brought to everything, of the architecture of why she was here and what she needed, and what she could not afford to lose sight of. It helped. Not entirely. On the 6th Thursday, he asked about her family. She gave him what she always gave in response to this question, the sanitized version, the plausible account. Her mother.
The port city.
The literature degree. The restaurants. He listened with the specific quality of a man who had learned, somewhere, to listen rather than just wait to speak. She noticed this and filed it. She also noticed the moment when she said something about her father, a fragment, carefully vague, the apartment and the particular smell of it and the year she was 11, and his expression changed in a way that wasn't strategic at all. My father wasn't a good man, he said. Not as a confession. As a statement of fact, the kind you made when you had long since stopped performing it.
No, she said.
Neither was mine. They sat with that for a moment. The restaurant around them went about its business. You make that sound like something you've resolved, he said. I've resolved, she said carefully, that it was true and that I couldn't change it and that it's not useful to carry it as something unresolved.
She paused.
What you do with the fact of a father who wasn't a good man is your own business. What you do with the choices he passed on to you, those are different. He was quiet for a long moment.
I have a daughter, he said.
I know, she said. Sophia. The bridge photographs. He looked at her. Then he said, with the particular quietness of something said after careful consideration, I've been thinking lately about what she's building toward. And whether what I've built is the kind of foundation she would choose, if she understood it clearly. This was the most honest thing he had said to her. She held it carefully, the way she held things that mattered. She could use it. She had been waiting for this. It was the door she had spent 6 weeks building toward, and it was open now, and the correct strategic move was to step through it. She did not step through it. I think, she said, that's worth sitting with for a while. She stood. Your sea base will be cold. She walked to the kitchen and pressed her hands flat on the counter and acknowledged, with the precision she brought to everything, that she had just made a decision that was not strategic. She thought about Lucia's pale eyes and her timing remark and the photograph of an unfinished bridge. She had 1 month, perhaps. She needed to move. Instead, she went back to the table, and they talked for another 40 minutes about things that had nothing to do with the organization she was here to dismantle, and she did not regret it, which was itself a data point she was not sure what to do with. She moved on Dante Ferraro on a Monday. Not directly. She had not become the person she was by making direct moves when indirect ones were available. She moved through the specific infrastructure she had built over 16 months, a fragment of conversation overheard and recorded, not by her, she had not been present, but by the device she had placed, in the 3rd week of her employment, in the private dining room where Fausto's operational meetings were held. A device so small and so ordinary that it had spent 16 months in plain sight as part of a floral arrangement that Elena had recommended to Marcelo for its aesthetic properties. She had not listened to most of what the device had gathered. She had gathered it, had stored it, had maintained the kind of complete neutrality about her own intelligence operation that was the difference between a person who did this work for a long time and a person who did it once and was destroyed by it. Information was not decision. You gathered until you knew what you were deciding. Then you decided. She had known for 2 weeks what she was deciding. Dante Ferraro was managing the movement of something through the Carini logistics network that Fausto Carini did not know about. This was the thing she had identified, confirmed, and sat with, the specific betrayal nested inside an organization that had been stable long enough to stop noticing that stability could hide rot as well as health. She compiled the file over 3 evenings in the apartment, using the tools she kept behind the false wall of the kitchen that no one had ever looked behind because it looked exactly like the wall it was. She was careful, and she was complete. When the file was finished, she read it through twice and found it accurate. Then she made a decision about what to do with it that was not the decision she had originally planned to make. She had planned to use it as leverage. That had been the original architecture. Gather the intelligence, use it to open a specific door that needed opening, and exit through that door with what she had come here for.
Clean.
Professional. The way she had done it twice before, in other cities with other organizations, both times successfully. She did not use it as leverage. She came to the restaurant on a Tuesday on her day off, and she asked Marcelo if she could use the back office for a phone call, and Marcelo, who had been working alongside her for 16 months and had formed the conclusion that she was either the most capable server he had ever employed or something entirely other, and who had been carefully not investigating which, told her yes. She made the call to Petra. The real one, not the encoded version.
She spoke clearly.
When she finished, she sat in the back office for several minutes. Then she went to Fausto Carini. Not at the restaurant. She had a number for him. A secondary number, not the one he gave publicly, because she had found it in the overheard conversations, and because she had always believed that knowing how to reach someone was a form of power that cost nothing and was worth everything. She sent a message. She said, I have information about Dante Ferraro that concerns your organization. I need 1 hour. He replied in 4 minutes. She gave him the file the following evening at the restaurant, in the private dining room with the floral arrangement. She gave it to him in the same precise, unemotional register. She gave everything. She did not tell him how she had obtained it. She told him what it documented, what it meant, and what she believed he should do about it. He read it in silence. The room had the quality of rooms where important things were happening without drama, the specific weight of consequential air.
Why? He said.
The same question Fausto always asked when something moved him past his prepared categories. Because it was the right thing to do, she said. And because the alternative was to let it compound until it became something you couldn't contain. She met his eyes. I don't want that.
What do you want? He said. She thought about this.
The architecture of the answer was complicated. The simple version was available and accurate and insufficient.
One more Thursday, she said.
He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. She went back to the dining room. Gianluca, the youngest of the servers, came to find her at 11 with a look of someone who had been carrying confusion for several weeks and had found an avenue for it. You were in there a long time, he said. Yes, she agreed. Is everything all right? She looked at him with a real smile, the one she kept for people who deserved it.
Get some sleep, she said.
You look tired. He left looking more confused than before. Confused people compared notes. They arrived eventually at the conclusion that something had changed. She needed them to reach that conclusion before the week was over. She was patient. She had always been patient. She was also running out of time. She just handed him the file. But what is she really planning? Drop your theory below. The best ones get pinned. Is she protecting him or setting the final trap?
Dante Ferraro was gone by Friday.
She did not ask what that meant in specific terms. She had learned over years and in difficult ways that the specifics of how organizations like this one dealt with internal betrayal were not things she needed to understand in detail. What she needed to understand was what his absence meant for the structure, the logistics network he had been managing, the specific vulnerability she had come here to close, the 3 months of movement that had been building toward a point of no return. Lucia had told her 2 months. She had, in the end, been given 6 weeks. Fausto told her only that the matter had been resolved. She noted the word, resolved, not ended, not addressed. The language of a man who had put something in a compartment and closed it. She nodded. She did not ask questions. She never asked. The Thursday that followed was different from the others. He came earlier. He came with a quality of purpose she hadn't seen in the previous weeks, which had had about them the gradual quality of a man becoming accustomed to something rather than seeking it. Tonight he sat at the table and looked at her with the directness of a man who had made a decision and was not yet saying it. Ricci was there. He had not been at Pavone before. She had known his name, his face, his profile, but not his physical presence, and physical presence was always different from profile. He was lean and watchful with the face of a man who had spent 3 decades looking at people and finding them, almost universally, less complicated than they believed themselves to be. He looked at Elena across the restaurant with a specific attention that told her he had been looking at her before he arrived. He had found something. She made the calculation in the space between recognizing his face and reaching the table. It was the same calculation she had made in the parking garage of another life, in another city, when she had assessed compliance against resistance and made the correct choice. She assessed what he might have found. She assessed what she could confirm and what she should deny, and what she needed to give him before he asked for it. She sat. Fausto introduced Ricci, without inflection. Ricci looked at her. You have an unusual background, Ricci said. His voice was flat and deliberate. For a waitress. Most waitresses have unusual backgrounds, she said. It's not usually a first career choice. The phone you used in the back office on Tuesday. We traced the number you called. She held his gaze. My previous employer, she said. I needed a reference for a matter unrelated to this position. Your previous employer in
Geneva, she said.
Hospitality management. I can provide documentation. He was quiet. She watched him test the edges of what she had given him. Fausto had been silent through this. He was watching her with the quality of attention she had come to understand as a specific way of processing things that mattered, not pushing, not withdrawing, but fully present in a way that was its own kind of examination. You knew Dante, Ricci said. I served him twice, she said. He ordered the sea base. He didn't leave a tip. Something almost crossed Ricci's face. Not amusement, the structural equivalent of it in a man who had largely stopped finding things amusing. The file you provided, he said. The documentation. Where did it come from? I have been in hospitality a long time, she said carefully. In establishments like this one. I hear things. I observe things. What I hear and observe, I document, because information is the only asset that doesn't depreciate and can't be taken from you. She met his eyes. I documented what I observed about Dante Ferraro because I observed it here, and it concerned the organization of the man whose table I was serving. She paused. I gave it to him because it was the right thing to do. Ricci looked at Fausto. Something passed between them. The abbreviated communication of men who had worked together for a long time and had developed a shorthand for it. Fausto said, "Leave us." Ricci left. Elena and Fausto sat across from each other in the empty restaurant. The kitchen had closed. The last server had gone home. The candles were burning down. "He thinks you're something more than what you say," Fausto said.
"He's right," she said.
The silence that followed was unlike their previous silences. It had a different weight. She watched him absorb what she had just confirmed, not with the controlled stillness of their early sessions, but with something that was managing more than composure.
"Who are you?" he said.
Not Ricci's version of the question. The other version. The one you asked when you had run out of reasons not to. She thought about the architecture of the answer. She thought about Lucia's pale eyes and the photograph of an unfinished bridge and the notebook in the kitchen and the 6 years and what they had cost. "I'm going to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to hear all of it before you respond." He said, "Tell me." She just confirmed it. He knows she's more than she says. What would you do in his position? Comment below. I need to know. And if someone sent you this story, subscribe. You clearly have excellent taste in friends. She told him everything. Not as a strategy. Not as a calculated disclosure designed to manage what Ricci had already partially found. Because she had been carrying it for 6 weeks and had found, unexpectedly, that the weight had changed, had ceased to be the weight of a professional maintaining operational security, and had become the weight of something else, something that had no useful name in the vocabulary she had built for herself. She told him about the city where she had grown up and the father who had made decisions with consequences. She told him about the 6 years, not literature, not restaurants, but the work she had done before restaurants, in the overlap between the organizations that governed from offices and the organizations that governed from back rooms, in the specific narrow territory of people who had learned to move between those two worlds without belonging fully to either. She told him what she had come here for. Not him, not originally. The logistic structure. Dante Ferraro, and what he had been managing, the specific movement of something through Carini's network that had an endpoint she had been working to prevent for 3 years, that had consumed 2 cities and a previous life, and the specific trust of the person she had been before she understood the cost of trust. She told him about the device in the floral arrangement in the private dining room. She told him she had not used most of what it had gathered. She told him that Dante Ferraro's activity had been the only thing she had come for, and that she had given it to him rather than using it, and that she was aware of what this said about the distance between her original plan and where she had arrived. He was very still while she spoke. The candles had burned lower. Outside the windows the city had gone to its late-night sounds, a distant car, rain beginning again, the specific quality of a city after midnight. When she finished, there was a silence of the kind that came after something large had arrived and neither person had yet decided what to do about it. "You were never just a waitress," he said. "No. The whole time. The Thursdays. The conversations. The Thursday conversations were real," she said. "What I told you about my father. About the apartment. About the things I built. The reasons I built them." She met his eyes. Those were real. They just also served a purpose. That's usually how it works.
"And now," he said.
"Now the purpose is finished," she said. "Dante is gone. The logistic structure he was managing is dismantled. The documentation I sent to a third party 2 weeks ago ensured that regardless of what happened here, it's done." She paused. "The operation is complete." He stood. He went to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a long moment, looking at the rain. "My grandmother," he said. "She came to see me 3 weeks ago," Elena said. "She had known for some time. She didn't tell you, because she believed you needed to find out yourself." "She's usually right," he said, in a tone she couldn't fully read. "Yes," she said. I think she is. He turned from the window. She had prepared for this moment in all its variations. Anger, she had prepared for that, had built the responses to it. Betrayal closed behind the composure he used for everything. A call to Ricci. She had not prepared for him to come back to the table and sit across from her with the look of a man who had completed a calculation he hadn't expected to find himself running. How much of it was real? He said carefully. Everything you said to me.
All of it, she said.
Real and purposeful aren't mutually exclusive. I gave you what was true. What I also did with it, I don't have a clean answer for that.
She paused.
I was doing what I do. And somewhere in the middle of doing it, something changed, and I didn't stop it changing. He was quiet. He looked at the table. At the empty wine glass. At the candle burning down. Ricci is going to come to me tomorrow, he said. With what he's found. And I'm going to have to decide what to tell him. Yes, she said. What do you think I should tell him? She looked at him for a long moment. I think, she said, that's the first question you've asked me in 6 weeks that I genuinely don't know the answer to. Something shifted in his face. She thought it might have been, for the first time, entirely unmanaged. She was in her coat, and at the door when he called her name. Elena.
She stopped.
What you were trying to prevent, he said. The end point. The thing Ferraro was building toward. Yes. Does it involve Sofia? The question landed with the weight of something she had been expecting and had not been able to prepare for adequately. She turned. She looked at him across the empty restaurant, the guttering candles, the rain against the glass. Not yet, she said. That's why I came. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved through his face, not the composure, not the performance, but the thing underneath it, the part she had seen in the garden conversation, and the photograph of the bridge. Then I know what I'll tell Ricci, he said. She stood outside in the rain for a while. She thought about 6 years. She thought about the cost of them, the specific ledger of what had been paid, and what had been given up, and what had been built in the gap, where other things used to be. She thought about the apartment, and the false wall, and the notebook, and what it meant to build a life around the logistics of departure. She thought about a man who kept photographs of bridges on his phone because his daughter was right that structure was the part that mattered. She thought about an old woman in a dressing gown who had told her the ordering of discoveries mattered. She thought about the restaurant with the candles burning down, and the specific quality of a conversation that had been more than it was supposed to be. Her phone vibrated. A message from Petra. 2 words, it's done. The logistic structure Dante Ferraro had been building was dismantled. The endpoint she had come here to prevent was prevented. The 6 years were complete in the way that things were complete when the thing they had been building toward was finished, and you were standing on the other side of it. She thought about what came next. For the first time in 6 years, she did not have an answer to that question that she had prepared in advance. She found, unexpectedly, that she was entirely all right with that. She came back to Pavone on a Thursday. She wasn't working. She came in at 7, in the clothes she wore outside the restaurant, and Marcello looked at her with the expression of a man who had long since concluded that the correct response to this particular situation was simply to show her to the best table. He showed her to table 4. Fausto arrived at 7:15. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at the table, at the wine already open, at the 2 glasses. He sat down.
She poured.
Ricci is not happy, he said. Ricci is rarely happy.
No.
But he's loyal. He paused. I told him the matter had been resolved at my discretion, and that the relevant intelligence had come from a source that was now an ally rather than a liability. He looked at the wine.
He accepted that.
Provisionally. Provisional, she said. Good word. There are conditions, he said. Things I'll need to understand. About the 6 years. About what you built. Yes, she said. There are things I'll need to understand about yours also. He looked at her. The restaurant was warm around them, the specific warmth of a place that had seen important things and continued, regardless, with its own life. Sofia sends a photograph, he said after a while. He showed her his phone. Another bridge, finished this time, clad and complete, spanning something she couldn't see the extent of. She looked at it for a long moment. The structure holds, she said. He put the phone away. Outside the window, the city was going about its night. Somewhere a door closed. Somewhere a light came on. The sounds of a place that never completely stopped, that built and continued building, that did not ask what came next but moved toward it regardless. Elena Vasquez, which was her real name, the only thing about her that had never required a qualification, picked up her wine glass. "Tell me about the Eastern accounts," she said. "The 3 vulnerabilities you mentioned to Ricci. The ones you've been trying to close for a year." He looked at her. Something in him, the composure, the wall, the particular discipline of a man who had learned to keep things separate, settled into something quieter and more permanent. "How do you know about those?" he said. "I'll explain," she said. "But the sea base is arriving in 4 minutes, and I'd like to start with the vulnerability in the secondary channel, because that one is actually straightforward if you know where to look." He almost smiled. She had been waiting, she realized in the moment it arrived, since the parking garage and the slap and the 11 seconds of silence, to see what that looked like on him. The real version. It looked like a bridge, she thought. Structure first. Everything else after. She turned the page. He leaned forward to read beside her. The restaurant was warm, and the wine was good, and outside the city was building itself, as it always was, into whatever came next. She kept the exit. She just chose not to use it. If this story wrecked you in the best way, like, comment, subscribe, tell me in the comments. What moment changed it for you? Was it the slap? The grandmother? The packed bag she didn't use? New story every week. Share this with someone who needs it.
See you next time.